Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 282 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where there came a flying dart, and only the charge of my editor has saved my co-host from the red Southland swords that would have hewed him as he lay.
I have returned, Lord, from great deeds. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Matt, the Nerd of the Rings, and I'm here with the Man of the West, up in the secret room in the tower with a pale light gleaming and flickering, Alan Sisto.
You know, I'm just binging The Expanse again. It's no big deal. Folks, join us as the Witch King presses ahead and the valor of Gondor withers into ash in the fourth of 5 episodes on the Siege of Gondor, the 4th chapter in The Return of the King.
Man, the valor of Gondor withers into ash.
Isn't that just a brutal line? Oh. Man.
We've had a lot of these in this chapter. A lot of lines.
Do you know how hard it was to pick what we're not actually reading? I mean, this chapter is cover to cover one of the most amazing chapters in the whole thing.
It really is. Now, folks, some of you are hearing this show for the very first time. To you, we bid a warm welcome. Here at the Prancing Pony podcast, we are reading, talking, and often joking our way through Middle-earth a few pages at a time.
Now we take a deep dive into the lore, we explore how the story came to be, we talk about our favorite themes, and a lot more.
But in a lighthearted and fun way, like friends chatting at the pub. And we're glad you've joined us.
And I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's discussion, it's time for one of my favorite intro segments, Questions Before Bedtime.
This is a fun little segment, and I'm glad that I am here to get to do one.
Yeah.
In fact, when I told my 6-year-old son that we were going to do this, he had a question for me.
I was wondering where Smaug came from because he's my favorite character.
First off, Matt, kudos to you for helping your son get the correct pronunciation of Smaug, not Smog. But I think we have to have a talk about your son's thought process if Smaug is his favorite character. When he finally reads the Silmarillion, what is he going to be, a Feanor fan? What, a Morgoth fan? I mean, come on.
No, I draw the line. There will be no Feanor sympathizers in my house.
Okay, good.
So
that's a red line, son. You do not want to cross that.
That's right. I think we can owe a great deal of this to my Smaug Funko Pop and playing as baby Smaug in Lego The Hobbit video game. I think contributes to this.
Smaug. Baby Smaug, I love it. That's great.
So, yeah, and I mean, he's 6, dragons, dinosaurs, those kind of things. That's cool. True. I mean, I think Smaug is cool to a certain extent.
How do you not?
All right?
I love him. I mean, he's fantastic. I don't know if he's my favorite character, but, that's just me.
Well, let's see if we can answer this one, shall we?
Well, we can answer some of it, but of course, your son has asked a question that has no clear answer, as I'm sure most 6-year-olds do. At no point does Tolkien write specifically about exactly when or where Smaug was born, but the text does have Thorin speaking of the withered heath where the great dragons bred. Now, that's clearly where he's from. This is a region to the north of Wilderland, and it's a very long east-west valley over in the eastern part of the Grey Mountains. As for when he was born, again, we don't know an exact date, but we do know that he was described as a young dragon when he attacked Dale and Erebor in Third Age 2770, and he calls himself old and strong, a little less than 200 years later in Third Age 2941 when speaking with Bilbo.
So if we compare that to a dragon we know a little bit more about, like Glaurung, we can get at least some idea. Yeah, I love Glaurung.
Glaurung's amazing. Perhaps just the creepiest guy ever, man.
Yes, he's. That's why I'm such a huge fan of the Children of Hurin side note, because you get dialogue with both Morgoth and Glaurung, two of the greatest.
And it is some of the most amazing dialogue ever written, isn't it?
It is fantastic.
Hail, Nienor, daughter of Hurin, I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last. And you're like, oh, that's just wrong.
Yes,
so many levels. Man.
We won't go any deeper into that in our response to a 6-year-old's question.
No,
here.
We definitely won't. Oh my goodness. No, we will not. Oh my goodness. Back that truck up.
Yes. Back to Glaurung. Glaurung,
yes.
Another dragon who did not have wings, by the way.
That's correct.
But he emerged in 260 of the First Age during the Siege of Angband. And he was described then as yet young and scarce half grown and not yet come to his full armory. Then in the Dagor Bragolach, he is described as in his full might. That battle took place in 455 of the First Age, just about 200 years later. So it seems like a safe bet to say that Smaug was born at least 100 years before his attack on Dale, but probably not more than around 200 years before. Or he'd have been closer to his full might.
Right.
So he's probably born somewhere around the mid-2600s.
That sounds about right. But, we've talked about where Smaug is from physically, when he was born. But what about the concept of Smaug, the idea of Smaug? Where did that come from? Well, in letter number 122 to Naomi Mitchison, Tolkien is responding to her praise for a short book of his called Farmer Giles of Ham, a story which features maybe my favorite Tolkien dragon, Chrysophylax Dives. And he says, Tolkien, that is, not Chrysophylax Dives, says, I find dragons a fascinating product of imagination, but I don't think the Beowulf one is frightfully good. Fafnir in the late Norse versions of the Sigurd story is better, and Smaug and his conversation obviously is in debt there. So, Smaug may have been born in the Withered Heath, but he's from the Norse legend of Fafnir. Now, for more on Smaug, and I mean a lot more on Smaug, check out our episodes on The Hobbit, starting with episode 79 way back in season 2.
And as long as we're talking about famous dragons, I feel like we have to bring up Encalagon the Black.
Oh, my,
just a little bit.
Sure, why not?
Because, I mean, we name-dropped Glaurung there, talked about him a little bit.
The father of all dragons, yeah.
Yes, the father of all dragons. And, Encalagon is one of those that has always intrigued me. His size in some depictions is
his size in some depictions is absolutely unreal. He would have a gravity well. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, it's a very interesting, the dragons period are interesting, and the fact that by the time of Smaug, he's the last one we ever hear of. But gosh, to hear of them come the time of the War of Wrath, it just is otherworldly.
Seriously, yeah. When Encalagon, ends up doing battle with Eärendil in the sky as he's aboard Vingalot with a Silmaril on his brow. Yeah. Encalagon has a special place in my heart. I've actually named my car Encalagon because it's black.
Oh,
and it actually has a license plate that says Encalagon. I mean, minus a few vowels because it can't fit that many letters on a California plate. But Encalagon the Black. And no, he was not the size of a small asteroid. Yes, the peaks of Thangorodrim were, smashed up in his collapse in his fall. Yeah. But that doesn't mean he was the size of those mountains, right? An object, force equals mass times acceleration. He was falling at a very significant rate. And also, let's not forget, the mountains of Thangorodrim were made of the ash and waste that were dug up when Morgoth made Angband. So, yeah, I mean, because the peaks were just made of ash and waste, they weren't proper mountains. They were tall, don't get me wrong, very tall. Yeah. They were the tallest in Middle-earth, but they were fragile, and they could be smashed at the bottom and then make the mountains collapse without Encalagon having to be the size of a mountain.
Strong enough to hang, Mithras from, though.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But he's not a very heavy elf.
He's not a very heavy elf. That's true.
Most of his weight was in one hand.
Real quick. I'm curious.
Too soon?
So Smaug, greatest dragon of all time, or are you more partial to Encalagon? I mean, your license plate is Encalagon, so maybe that answers it.
But that's just because it's a black car. The thing is, we're not told anything of Encalagon's mind, of his evilness. Smaug is wonderful in his dialogue. I love the way he cons Bilbo into revealing too much about himself.
Yeah.
And the way he speaks poetically, right? My armor is like tenfold shields, and my claws, spears, and my breath, death. Just great stuff. So yeah, he's right up there, but I actually think Glaurung.
Yeah.
The father of all dragons, far and away the nastiest, most evil, mean-spirited, just venomous dragon. The stuff he did, legendary.
It's at a whole other level. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, if you haven't read Children of Hurin, do it, unless you're the 6-year-old question we're answering, in which case, please do not read the Children of Hurin for many, many years.
We'll stick with The Hobbit for now.
Please do. All right. Well, just like last week, before we get to our reading and discussion, we want to welcome back to the Common Room Dr. Bret Deveraux. Well, last week, folks, we introduced you to Bret Deveraux, military and ancient historian, and author of a collection of unmitigated pedantry. Now, we're happy to have him join us again. Bret, welcome back.
Great to be back.
When we get to tonight's discussion, we're thrown into the thick of things pretty quickly. Watching the retreat of Faramir becoming a rout, but then Denethor releases a mounted sortie, led by the Prince of Dol Amroth and Gandalf the White. Now, the question, Bret, what exactly is a sortie? What other purposes might a sortie serve in battle?
Right, yeah. So a sortie is a word for a sort of almost, I want to say, light attack. It is not the main assault, but, essentially a less substantial attack. In this case, a sortie is an attack that you intend to come home again, right? That it's going to go out, do something, and come back. These days, we most commonly use sortie to refer to aircraft, right? Aircraft sortie, because they fly, bomb something or shoot something, and then they come back. So this is a sortie. In this case, right, it's in the context of a siege. So a sortie, right, they're going to go out of the protection of the fortress, strike, and then come back. And this is something that defenders could do. We often imagine sieges as a situation where the defender is terribly passive. Is just sort of sitting around and waiting for things to happen. But defenders, can sally out of the walls. They can exit the gates and try and hinder the progress of the attackers, damage siege equipment, smuggle things through the lines, all sorts of things.
I think we saw some of that in Helm's Deep, right? There's a sally port near the gate near the Hornburg that Aragorn went out of. Yeah, I remember that. Okay.
And fortifications are usually equipped with sally ports for this very purpose. Yeah. Because the main gate is likely to be heavily guarded by the enemy. And we'll see subsequently that once the siege is properly laid, the Witch King takes precautions to keep that from happening. But in this moment, he's still moving, and so this is an effort by the defenders to inflict damage, slow the enemy down without committing themselves to an open field battle, which would obviously be a disaster.
Yeah, a pitched battle at this point would be. You're right. The numbers aren't there. So a follow-up to this then, we also read that thanks to this sortie, the retreat turns into an onslaught, right? This is where the defenders' forces actually now have the advantage. Did the Witch King's forces reach too far? I mean, the sortie doesn't seem to be a particularly large force, so how do they accomplish this? And then I also wanted to have you tell us a little bit more about cavalry screens. We mentioned those last week, but here we get a very clear description that the men that were in this rout are given time and space to reform their ranks thanks to this cavalry screen that the Prince of Dol Amroth forms. So two parts to that. Talk to us a little bit about the retreat becoming an onslaught, and then a little bit about the cavalry screen.
Right. So the nature of defending against cavalry, especially with infantry, but even also with other cavalry, is that formation is king. If you are stretched out, spread out, split up, cavalry is incredibly dangerous. Those incoming riders can weave between spread out troops, killing as they go. They're much more mobile. It's very hard to strike back effectively. And of course, the psychological temptation for the defender in this case is going to be to run, which is just going to make you more vulnerable to the cavalry because they're faster than you.
Yep.
And so what's happened here, and here it's important, I think, to understand the geography right. The Plainor is a quite large space. We're talking about an area of probably miles. I measured it out for the blog post.
I believe it's 12 miles from the city gate to the part of the wall that's furthest.
That sounds about right. So this pursuit has been going for a while.
Yeah,
and what's clearly happened is that the forces of Mordor in the pursuit have become strung out and disorganized. They're trying to catch up to Faramir. They're trying to harry him and harass him. It's this running battle. Faramir's unit is slowly and then rapidly falling apart. But the orcs have sort of strung out in their pursuit. They're moving as fast as they can. It's worth keeping in mind, contra, say, the movies, they're not moving over a wide open field of grass. The Pelennor is townland, so this area is cut across by villages and fields. So presumably some of these guys are getting hung up on fences. Some of them are maybe dispersing to loot. It's a mess, right? Their cohesion has broken down. And Denethor, once again, strategic but callous, lets them string themselves out as far as he possibly can, even though he is very literally risking his son's life in doing so. He lets them string out as much as they can, and then at the key moment, right, his cavalry attacks. And we're told they had been gathering underneath Minas Tirith's main wall in its shadow, so they were hard to see.
Aha.
So it's a surprise.
Yeah, they've sprung a trap. Yeah.
Yeah, the forces of Mordor may assume there is no more cavalry, and so they're advancing somewhat carelessly. We know the Witch King is not yet present here. We're told that when Gandalf chases off the other Nazgul. So his keen tactical mind is not yet on display. And so now Denethor's cavalry advances. They're going to be fresh, tight, and in good order. Assuming they're functioning like medieval heavy cavalry. Medieval European heavy cavalry ideally wants to fight in a single line or two lines with a lot of separation between them, very densely placed. We get descriptions of the sort of ideal of a cavalry charge is one where, like, you could have thrown a glove and it would have traveled a mile upon all the horses before hitting the ground because these guys are stirrup to stirrup next to each other.
Wow.
So they're really, and that's probably what we should imagine, right, with Imrahil's forces, is that they're ready to go. They're all formed up. They're fresh. And so they hit these disordered, disorganized, orcs that are crossing the open in, farmlands and fields, which is perfect cavalry terrain.
Yeah, it is.
And they just roll them over. And once that collapse starts happening, it's very hard to get a hold of it. And then that creates breathing room for Faramir's troops to put themselves back together again, right? To gather up and to form into a coherent unit and make it to the city. Of course, the other key thing that Denethor does is then the moment that sort of maximum damage and the safety of his troops has been achieved, he calls the sortie back. He isn't going to make the same mistake that the bad guys just did and overextend.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Now, later on, we discover that the city is now fully besieged. So they're encircled by enemy forces that have breached the Ramas in a bunch of places. And setting aside the magical despair aspect caused by the Nazgul, what sort of reaction would the men of Minas Tirith have to this development? And a second question here is, how successful are sieges generally? And aside from the arrival of the Rohirrim, what could possibly bring Gondor victory in this situation?
So, sieges are not great news. Just to sort of place
they
the
don't
obvious.
sound like great news.
They're not fun.
No.
Obviously, the besieged, you're going to have to ration supplies. Being in a besieged castle or city is unpleasant, to say the least. And the other thing here, you want to think about your chances of living through this experience. In an open field pitched battle, even when you lose, casualties are not usually that high. In Hollywood or what have you, right? You have an open battle and everybody is killed on the losing side. It's hard to get a clear sense, but generally we think that the losing side might suffer something like 15% casualties in a battle like this. Somewhat higher if there's an extensive cavalry pursuit, but not wildly higher. Pursuit is hard. By the time you've lost the battle, everybody's tired and so on. But in a siege, you can't run. There is nowhere to go. And moreover, sieges, obviously, they're deadly for both the attacker and the defender. The attacker is very likely to massacre the besieged population, almost in vengeance for, well, you made me do this thing I did not want to do. You did not surrender. I had to sit out in the muck for 3 months building catapults to come get you. And so now I am going to take out my pent-up rage and anger on whoever I can get a hold of. So this is bad news. If you win, it's going to be unpleasant. If you lose, it's going to be catastrophic. And so it's not surprising that we hear like morale dips the moment that the siege is completed, fully delivered. They're worried about hunger. They're worried about supplies. And obviously part of even without supernatural elements, part of the Witch King's plan here is to capitalize on that. He is aiming to make that morale worse. In terms of Gondor winning, I think there are a lot of moving parts, and the Witch King is planned pretty well. Normally for a siege of a city like this, you don't expect to be able, without reinforcements, to sally out and win a battle. You're probably not going to just inflict so many losses that the enemy attack falls apart. But what you can do is play for time. You have gathered all of the agricultural production in the local area inside the city, and we hear this being done in previous chapters. You've sent away all of the non-combatants you can. So your force is very lean. Your food consumption is hopefully fairly low. You have a lot of it stockpiled. Yeah. By contrast, your enemy is well out of their logistics network. Their army is concentrated. I go through some of this math in the posts. The Witch King is on the clock.
Yeah.
The moment his troops step out from Minas Morgul and the Black Gate, there is a timer ticking. He has to take the city before he runs out of food.
Yeah.
And that timer is ticking pretty aggressively. So if you are Gondor, your goal is to just slow this down so that his alarm clock goes off and his army has to turn around before he has taken the city. The downside for you is that he has naval supply.
Yep.
And naval supply, ships allow for almost infinite supply throughput. Yeah. And that raises the potential that he could stick in this siege for as long as it
takes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if Aragorn doesn't win at Pelargir and take that Black Fleet, you're right. There's at that point, the supplies are going to keep coming in.
Right.
Even replacement troops are going to be coming in. And at that point, it's just a question of time. Starvation, if nothing else. Yeah.
Which may explain why Denethor does not tell anyone about that.
Very good point. Strategic, but callous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we also discover, as we've talked about last week, the second army, the one that issued from the Morannon. Like you talked about, there's no way that you could put all those forces on that narrow road that Frodo and Sam walked up, into the Morgul Vale. So the second army coming out from the Morannon, they take Caer Andros. They're blocking the road now through Anorion, presumably, at least from the Witch King's perspective, cutting off any potential arrival from Rohan. Certainly, the forces of Minas Tirith believe that to be the case as well. So talk to us about what that means for all three of those particular combatants, for Gondor, for Rohan, and for Mordor, that blocking of the road from Rohan through Anorion.
Right. The use of the blocking force here is pretty clever bit of operational art. Again, we used that term last week. We can use it again. Because obviously it prevents reinforcements, and it, in theory, creates a situation where Rohan cannot suddenly show up where they're not expected, say, in the rear of your army at daybreak. Now, of course, the problem is that clearly that army lacks a degree of local knowledge. They block the main road, and they figure we got it, which normally that would be enough.
Job done.
Yeah, but in this case, obviously it is not enough.
No, it's not.
Nevertheless, I think the Witch King could probably be forgiven for having thought, I have planned this through. When we hear about this army later, they've taken position on the road, they've dug a trench and put some stakes across it, which is a really effective defense against cavalry. Makes a lot of sense given what they're facing. Even if this army were defeated, the army that defeated them would, Rohan would not defeat them and then be able to move directly into another battle, so they'd arrive late.
Yeah, just more delaying tactics then, in that case.
And this is a common element in siege warfare, is that on the one hand, the attacking army is facing inward at the city that they're attacking. On the other hand, they're thinking about relief armies, and so they need to also be facing outward. This is something I criticized Saruman for his army for failing to do.
Yeah. They had the perfect opportunity, right? They had the dike behind them.
The dike was there.
Just man it with like 10% of your troops and you stop. Yeah.
And they just don't. They just don't man it and get surprised in the rear by infantry and trees.
The trees part I can understand. I mean, I think we'd all be surprised by a suddenly appearing forest, but it does seem a little.
But I've heard they're very sneaky.
Yes, very sneaky trees. But yeah, you should not be ambushed by infantry on open ground.
No,
that should not happen. And so the Witch King has been more clever. In actual siege warfare, often the form that this concern would take is we talk about circumvallation, which the Witch King does in his own way. This is building some kind of defensive ring around the target so that the enemy cannot sally out. And then contravallation, which is building another defensive wing facing outside So you've created a donut your army is in.
Okay.
And so that you're defended from both directions. The Witch King's army is so big that rather than doing this on the tactical level outside the city, he's functionally doing this operationally. And thinking in terms of where we hear forces, right, he has a main army on the road in Anorian. He also has troops that are supposed to be manning the Ramos Ekor, though they end up taken by surprise. Some bad junior officer work there. Some files to find in your do not promote.
The do not promote file for Sauron's forces is actually going to get a lot bigger, but yeah.
Oh no, it's a big do not promote list. And of course, then he also has the fleet is a blocking force facing the other direction towards Gondor. So he has done a lot to seal the battle space to give himself a very controlled environment for this assault, and that's good practice. He is doing it right.
Excellent.
Now, we've seen earlier in this chapter fire in the lines, and here we are told that trenches are being filled with fire as they are being made. The quote is, "Though how it was kindled or fed by art or devilry, none could see." So we don't know how the fire is there, but maybe you could explain the why for us. Why would fire among the enemy's lines be a benefit to them?
Right. So the purpose of these trenches, it's important to understand how trenches work in pre-gunpowder warfare. We're used to the idea of you dig trenches so that your troops can get in the trenches and fight from the trenches in sort of World War I style. This certainly would have been Tolkien's experience at the battlefield, but Tolkien knows enough about pre-modern warfare to know that trenches don't work that way in pre-modern warfare. There aren't enough deadly things flying through the air on a pre-gunpowder battlefield to make getting in a trench make sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
If the enemy's shooting arrows or what have you, just shields work.
Yeah.
And in any event, we're told these trenches are out of bowshot. What these trenches are for is as physical obstructions. That if the enemy sallies out, right, if they try that cavalry sortie again, these trenches will block their horses.
Right.
The fire is a wonderful fantasy touch, but probably unnecessary.
So it's a bit theatrical.
Yeah. It's great. But this was a standard thing. So, for instance, fortified Roman marching camps we discussed last time. The main defense of the camp was a wooden palisade because these are temporary fortifications. But what the Romans would do is they would dig usually a double row of trenches. They would take the earth from those double row of trenches, build a mound on the inside, and then put the palisade on the mound. The mound is called the agar. You're not going to fight in those trenches. They fill the trenches with like stakes and sharp things. So an enemy approaching the wall has to navigate these trenches, which are going to slow them down and foul them up and so on. And it's going to give you, the defender, time to concentrate forces. So when the enemy finally does get out of the trenches on the other side, they're facing all of your guys.
Yeah.
And you have a superior position. And so these trenches are protecting the staging areas for the assault. That's their purpose, which is why the trenches go up first. And then immediately after, we hear the wains come up with the siege engines, with the catapults to be set up to throw fire into the city. So that's ensuring that, you don't have a situation where you set up your catapults or your siege towers and you're getting all set up, and then Imrahil and Dol Amroth comes out again and surprise!
And destroys all your sieges.
And destroys all your stuff, which was a thing that happened regularly in sieges. That was a standard defender's tactic. And so, the Witch King is very carefully hedging against that. He's going to keep the defenders in, and that's what the trenches are doing. That said, military historian in me, I can't help but feel like these trenches are an echo of the experience on the Western Front. And there's an element of seeing the big attack forming up and getting ready and being unable to do anything about it, which is very present in World War I literature, where it's coming and you just have to wait for it.
Yeah.
That you can see, because before a major attack on the Western Front, your enemy might dig communications trenches. They're going to establish depots for artillery ammunition, because once the barrage starts, they're going to be firing thousands and thousands and thousands of shells. Some World War I battles have nearly nuclear yields of explosives thrown by conventional artillery.
Wow.
The barrages at Verdun can be counted in kilotons of explosives thrown.
Goodness.
So you've got to stockpile all those shells in advance. Yeah. And so if you're the defender, you're watching the enemy get ready.
And there's nothing you can do.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
That really fits because, we've had Pippin say a couple of times, one of them very explicitly saying that there's nothing worse than being on the edge of a battle but having to wait for it. And what you say here really kind of confirms that in a very visual way for the folks in Minas Tirith who were looking out at night and seeing these rows and rows and rows filled with fire. Yeah, definitely.
And certainly being on the edge of the battle and not being able to do anything about it, this is, again, it recurs a lot in World War I literature. It was a major command concern. Okay. Usually the worry was when staging an attack. People sometimes wonder why were commanders, especially in the First World War, so reluctant to postpone attacks for things like bad weather. And the answer is because morale collapses.
Oh, yeah,
when
the longer
you
you
do that,
wait.
Because guys have built up all their adrenaline. They're ready. They're pumped. They have summoned the will to get out of that trench, and then you tell them to wait, and the exhaustion hits you instantly because all that adrenaline was pumping through your system. You're tired, you're slow, and it just takes so much more effort to build up again.
Oh, my goodness.
And so there's a worry that, if we don't go, we're not going to go.
It's now or never, quite literally.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the same sort of experience. Like Pippin is experiencing the exhaustion of this battle is coming, but it's not here. So I'm on adrenaline all the time. My body is sort of running at full speed, and I'm just out. I'm like, the tank's empty.
Yeah. No wonder he needs some second breakfast.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about how those trenches then are there to help protect the building of or the assembly of these siege engines. As those siege engines open fire, we discover two very different kinds of ammunition. The first is some flammable explosive shot covered in pitch, maybe something like maybe a bit like Greek fire, maybe. Talk to us a little bit about that. But the other is this dreadful thing, the decapitated heads of the men who fell defending Osgiliath and the Ramas. How does this rank in terms of historical cruelty?
So, I'm afraid to say this is pretty par for the course in terms of siege warfare. Yeah, siege warfare is rough.
It is brutal. Okay.
It's just rough. So I mean, we can start with the fire munitions. Hollywood loves putting fire arrows and flaming catapult munitions everywhere.
Yeah.
Once again, Tolkien, bless his heart, puts them in the correct place because Hollywood loves putting them in the open field battles where they're basically useless. But this is where you would use them. This is where incendiary munitions like this were real. They're well documented. We often actually see specialized, arrow tips and catapult rounds and things like this. You can actually pretty easily identify, in my own experience with the Romans, incendiary Roman arrows, and they even had javelins. They had incendiary delivering javelins.
Wow.
Because behind the tip, they will have this sort of hollow wire diamond just above where it sockets into the haft of either the shaft of the arrow or the haft of the javelin. So you have the tip, and then you have this kind of hollow kind of diamond shape so that you could wrap like a cloth that's been soaked in some kind of oil, probably olive oil for the Romans, but it could be pitch or tar or whatever, something that burns, and you light that and you fire it. Of course, this is going to make the munition, it's going to be heavier, it's not going to go as far. And you're not going to light people on fire with it. No. The human body is mostly water. We don't burn very easily.
We put out fires with our bodies, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, if a fire arrow lands near you, you just step on it.
Yeah.
There we go, it's out.
Only you can prevent forest fires. Sorry. Had to bring Smokey into this.
But in the context of a siege, you can throw so much of this stuff.
Yeah.
And these cities they're very burnable. They're full of things that burn, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's furniture is made of wood. Many of these buildings, we're told, are stone, but there's presumably wood framing supporting the roofs. The visual that the films go with is sort of terracotta tile roofs, which, that makes sense. These would be supported by wooden frames. Those burn. There's all sorts of burnable stuff in a city. Obviously, it'd be even worse if your roofs were thatch. But here they're probably not because these are mostly stone buildings. So there's all sorts of things that can burn. And the city is very, very big. Once a fire gets out of control, putting it out is almost impossible. And so your only hope is to get these fires extinguished rapidly as they start. When a bucket brigade is still going to be enough. And so by starting so many fires in so many places, you both force your enemy to run around putting out fires, but you also increase the chance that one of these will get out of control and become a real continuing problem that they'll have to combat. That siphons men away from the defense of the city, potentially inflicts casualties. And the other thing it's doing is it cuts sections of the defense off from each other. They can no longer reinforce because there's a burning city in the way. And so this is a way that flaming ammunition was used in warfare in terms of flinging the severed heads of captives. So flinging, let's say broadly, organic material over walls was a common recourse. This could be slain enemies. It was also sometimes just like dead, rotting cattle. One of the ideas was to spread disease. We're just going to fling rotting carcasses into the city until you all get sick.
And now all I can imagine is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Feshu Levash.
Right, yeah.
And, the flinging of the cow up into
You just got to,
And now I understand exactly why. Spread disease, okay.
Yeah. Here, of course, the other thing is the morale impact.
Yeah.
This kind of maneuver can backfire. You can do something like this and just make your opponent mad. That certainly does happen. But in this case, right, it combines with an atmosphere of despair. If the defenders had hope, they'd get angry, but they don't. And so, right, it just sort of crushes in that sense of despair. And that morale fight is important. If you look at what the Witch King is doing across the board, the thing he's trying to avoid is a situation where he has to storm these walls when they're fully defended. They're the walls can resist all of his siege artillery. That's not crazy, by the way. Catapults were not usually designed to knock holes in walls. You used catapults to engage defenders, to pick off the crenellations, which are the firing positions on the top of the wall, to damage things inside the enemy settlement. But a good wall was going to be almost immune to catapults. And certainly the description of Minas Tirith's defenses as being basically impregnable to this. What it puts me in mind are the Theodosian walls of Constantinople. These were late Roman walls. The Romans were very worried about the potential of mass catapult usage because in the ancient world, that was a thing that happened. Most medieval rulers did not have the capabilities to deploy that. And so Constantinople's walls were preposterously thick and extremely heavy. Even when the city falls in 1453, the Ottomans bring cannon. And they bring heavy, big, giant siege cannon. And in the end, they still don't breach the walls. They gain access to the city by so heavily damaging a gatehouse that the gate can no longer close. And so this sort of this idea that you might have a wall that is so over the top defensive that throwing catapult fire at it is just completely pointless, immediately viable to me. And so the Witch King is I need to suppress these defenders to the maximum degree in order to make my eventual assault on the gate successfully. Because if I'm facing their full force at that gate, it's going to cost me too much to win this gate. And so everything he's aiming to do, I'm going to degrade their morale so that they retreat. I'm going to start lots of fires. I'm going to suppress them with lots of catapults. I'm going to launch lots of diversionary attacks, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Everything I can do to weaken resistance at the critical point that he's doing.
Now, after Denethor abandons his leadership of the city, Gandalf takes command. And we're told that he, along with Imrahil, are able to lift the spirits of the men in defense of the city, raising their morale, basically. But when they'd leave, unfortunately, that despair would return. And you touched on this a little bit earlier with Faramir, but talk to us about the crucial importance of morale in this sort of conflict in a siege.
Yeah, what is the line? The valor of the men of Gondor withered to ash. Oh, so evocative.
That is
so wonderful.
such a powerful line.
It's such a line.
It really is.
And that comes after, what is it? For yet another weapon, swifter than hunger, the Lord of the Dark Tower had dread and despair. And I'm like, it's so good.
So good.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, this is the role of leadership. We may imagine there is perhaps something supernatural with Gandalf's role, though probably not with Imrahil, who is just a dude.
Yeah. Even if he has a little elfin blood in him, he's still just a dude.
He does. Yeah. Is sort of valorous. But yeah, and you can, again, almost, to me, it's evocative of the good captain walking the trench line in World War I, that where he goes, the soldiers' spirits pick up, but then when he leaves, they sag again. and the sort of despair creeps in. Some of this, of course, is supernatural despair, but there's also just a lot of despair and terror in battle. And good leadership can have this effect. Of course, bad leadership can have the reverse effect. And in some ways, it's probably good that Denethor has checked out at this particular
an excellent
moment.
point. Yeah.
But yeah, and so what Gandalf and Imrahil are doing is a pretty standard element of what good military leadership has been understood to mean from the ancient world to today. That leaders have to get out there, they have to be seen, because their psychology, the psychology of the battlefield is so important, and they have to maintain that morale. But of course, a leader cannot be everywhere.
No.
And so this passage is just, again, really evocative of that problem. And so, Gandalf and Imrahil are like moving along the line. They're trying to be in as many places at once as they can. They cannot be everywhere. And again, that is a theme that one hears a lot, even in modern warfare. The sort of, the good captain getting out in front of his company and like letting them know, I'm here with you.
Yeah.
And the bad captain that fails to do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that does it for our time this week with Bret. But the good news is he will be back again next week. Bret, thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Till next week.
Man, once again, that was phenomenal. I sure hope he's going to be able to come back and join us for the Battle of the Pelennor Fields.
Oh yeah, like I said last week, I could sit here and listen to Bret talk about this stuff for hours. There
is a part of me that wishes we just, and it was too late to do this because everything is dependent on it on the entirety of the season. But there's a part of me that wishes we just done 6 episodes in the Siege of Gondor and had one of them just be Bret talking.
Yes. Yeah, literally. Just the two of us listening while Bret talks.
Maybe answering a question, asking a question here and there, but that's it. Letting him talk for like 2+ hours and just telling us all about this, because I could listen to him for ages.
Absolutely. Now, with that said, we do need to get into the text. So, Alan.
Yeah, we do.
Would you start us out again?
I will be happy to. Now the main retreat was scarcely 2 furlongs distant. Out of the gloom behind, a small company of horsemen galloped, all that was left of the rear guard. Once again, they turned at bay, facing the oncoming lines of fire. Then, suddenly, there was a tumult of fierce cries. Horsemen of the enemy swept up. The lines of fire became flowing torrents, file upon file of orcs bearing flames, and wild Southron men with red banners, shouting with harsh tongues, surging up, overtaking the retreat. And with a piercing cry, out of the dim sky fell the winged shadows, the Nazgul stooping to the kill. The retreat became a rout. Already men were breaking away, flying wild and witless here and there, flinging away their weapons, crying out in fear, falling to the ground. And then a trumpet rang from the citadel, and Denethor at last released the sortie. Drawn up within the shadow of the gate, and under the looming walls outside, they had waited for his signal, all the mounted men that were left in the city. Now they sprang forward, formed, quickened to a gallop, and charged with a great shout. And from the walls an answering shout went up, for foremost on the field rode the swan knights of Dol Amroth, with their prince and his blue banner at their head. "Amroth for Gondor," they cried. "Amroth to Faramir." Like thunder they broke upon the enemy on either flank of the retreat. But one rider outran them all, swift as the wind in the grass. Shadowfax bore him, shining, unveiled once more, a light starting from his upraised hand. The Nazgul screeched and swept away, for their captain was not yet come to challenge the white fire of his foe. The hosts of Morgul, intent on their prey, taken at unawares in wild career, broke, scattering like sparks in a gale. The out-companies with a great cheer turned and smote their pursuers. Hunters became the hunted. The retreat became an onslaught. The field was strewn with stricken orcs and men, and a reek arose of torches cast away, sputtering out in swirling smoke. The cavalry rode on. But Denethor did not permit them to go far. Though the enemy was checked, and for the moment driven back, great forces were flowing in from the east. Again the trumpet rang, sounding the retreat. The cavalry of Gondor halted. Behind their screen, the out-companies reformed. Now steadily they came marching back. They reached the gate of the city and entered, stepping proudly, and proudly the people of the city looked on them and cried their praise. And yet they were troubled in heart, for the companies were grievously reduced. Faramir had lost a third of his men. And where was he? Where was he, Matt?
Oh my gosh.
What did you do with Faramir?
I guess we'll find out later in this episode, maybe.
I hope so.
So going back to the start of the section here, we open with the retreat from last week drawing closer to the gate. They are now a quarter of a mile away, which is about 400 yards, 400 meters in that ballpark. That's from the gate at this point, and it's very close.
Yeah, that is such a small distance when you think about it. I mean, if 400 yards is one lap around a track, and that is just not a huge distance. They're really right there. And the remnants of this rear guard at that point turn back to face the enemy one last time to protect the retreating force so they can draw near to the gate.
Yeah, but this time the chasing enemy has a big advantage. Horsemen, larger numbers, flowing torrents, as it's said, and the flying Nazgul.
Yeah, that's always an advantage. Now, we talked about this with Bret earlier, right? This retreat, which moments ago was in good order, just a few hundred yards from home, has turned into a rout. It's just men running for their lives now. They're dropping their weapons. They're falling to the ground. They're all going to get slaughtered if something doesn't happen.
And now it's in this moment, finally, Denethor releases the mounted sortie that Gandalf suggested last episode.
Yep.
Kind of reminds me of like Braveheart, the hold, like you're waiting.
Hold.
Just
hold.
keep waiting. Yeah.
Wait. Yeah.
And like Bret pointed out, they've been gathering in the shadow of the gate, giving them an advantage. They're kind of hidden. So they have this advantage of surprise. The enemy might expect a sortie, but it would come from within the city, presumably.
Yeah.
Requiring the gate to be opened before the attack could be made.
Right, giving them indication that a sortie might be coming. Instead, they leap out of the shadows, they form up quickly, and they charge right away with a shout. And the men on the walls are returning that shout, cheering on Imrahil, the prince of Dol Amroth. Yeah. And we're going to get to talk more about him later on.
Now, they charge the enemies that are flanking the retreat, but the text calls our attention to one rider in particular.
That's right.
And this is an unveiled Gandalf with magical light coming from his hand.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on the unveiled nature of Gandalf here. I'm just going to leave that alone. But I do want to talk about this briefly. It's the second time that we've seen him do this light from the hands thing, and just in this very chapter. Back in the first episode on the Siege of Gondor, we read first that it seemed to Pippin that a pale light was spread about him, talking about Gandalf, and the heavy shadows gave way before it. And then shortly after, it seemed to Pippin that Gandalf raised his hand, and from it, a shaft of white light stabbed upward, and that caused the Nazgul to leave as Faramir first approached the city just a few days ago on March 10th.
And now he does it again. And why doesn't he use these powers all the time, right?
That's a good question.
It is, yeah. But Tolkien answers this one in one of his letters, specifically letter 156. He talks about Gandalf, how he sacrificed himself, was accepted and enhanced and returned.
Mm-hmm.
He points out how he's still the same Gandalf in terms of his personality, but both his wisdom and power are much greater. In fact, so much greater that Tolkien says that Gandalf 1.0 could not have dealt so with Theoden nor with Saruman.
That's right. But he also explains why Gandalf doesn't just take over the battlefield and become the all-powerful weapon of Minas Tirith. He says, Gandalf is still under the obligation of concealing his power and of teaching rather than forcing or dominating wills. But where the physical powers of the enemy are too great for the goodwill of the opposers to be effective, and that's the key, and we'll see that later too. Tolkien then says he can act in emergency as an angel, no more violently than the release of St. Peter from prison. That would have been the situation where there was an earthquake, right?
Yes,
yeah. So Tolkien goes on to say he seldom does so, operating rather through others, but in one or two cases in the war, he does reveal a sudden power, And he references these exact moments. He twice rescues Faramir. Gandalf alone is left to forbid the entrance of the Lord of the Nazgul to Minas Tirith when the city has been overthrown and its gates destroyed. Spoiler. And yet so powerful is the whole train of human resistance that he himself has kindled and organized that in fact no battle between the two occurs. It passes to other mortal hands. I love that. I love that because not only does it explain why Gandalf doesn't do all the magic stuff all the time, it even explains why he doesn't have to fight the Witch King at that standoff that we're going to get to at the very end of the chapter.
Well, because the Witch King's already broken his staff, right? Is that?
Oh no! Don't you dare go there! Oh, I can't believe you did that.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I know you're kidding.
I'm kidding, guys. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got a bunch of pitchforks coming after you now, man.
For the record, that's one of my least favorite changes, folks. And part of the reason that I told Alan I wanted to guest on this section, on this chapter, is because I love so much the face-off that we're going to see later.
Yeah, the end of the last episode is just awesome. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I can't wait. But returning to the present time here, this causes the Nazgul to do just what they did the last time. Leave.
Yep. Magic light, we're out. Yeah.
Yep. They know that they need the Witch King here to face off against Gandalf. They can't. The regular Nazgul are not good enough.
That's right.
In the meantime, the Orc and Southern forces forcing the retreat find the situation reversed. Now they're taken by surprise and moving in wild career. The forces broke and turned.
Now, sidebar real quick. The use of the word career here has nothing to do with the Orcs' chosen profession or their jobs at the moment, though I would guess some are indeed regretting their career choices at the moment. No, the word as Tolkien is using it here means to move swiftly and in an uncontrolled way. The attack on the retreating forces was not well organized, right? I mean, they're just chasing them down.
Right.
And their attack as a result is very susceptible to the counterattack provided by Gandalf and Imrahil here. That word, the word for both a professional career and moving swiftly in an uncontrolled way, comes from a mid-16th century French word, carrière, from Italian carriera, both based on Latin carus, or wheeled vehicle. And there I am filling the role of Sean Marchese, Lord of the Mark.
That's right. Yeah, because I know that I'm not filling that role for sure, so I'm glad somebody can.
You listen to him for 6 years, you eventually figure these things out.
You pick up some things. Yeah, that's good.
Do.
And now the retreat turns into an onslaught. Yeah. Gondor's forces start hunting the orcs, and the cavalry rides further afield.
Careful now, not for long. Denethor does know better, as Bret talked about. Denethor is a pretty sound tactician. He knows better than to let the sortie get so strung out that the tables get turned yet again. So he sounds the retreat. The cavalry halts and provides a screen, allowing those remaining units to reform. I thought that explanation of a screen from Bret was really fantastic. I hadn't thought about that. The idea that as they look to form up for a charge, the other people have to stop, do what they're doing, form up, and get ready to receive a charge. But then you're like, oh, never mind. Psych. So, they are able to screen those forces as they prepare and reform in order to make that retreat complete.
Yeah, and as they enter the gate, the people praise them and their bravery.
Yeah.
But at the same time, many will be grieving and worried. Mm-hmm. A third of Faramir's men are gone. Oh, and most importantly, there's no Faramir. Where is he?
And I guess we're going to find that out after the break. Now, before we get back to the text and to where exactly Faramir got off to, we want to make sure you know that even after you've listened to this episode, there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now, on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. Follow the page, but also join the group in order to get some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply @PrancingPonyPod.
And folks, if you enjoy the PPP, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. When you do, you get a lot. You get an active Discord community that includes live episode recordings. You also get postscripts to the episodes without the digital ads, and a lot more.
Like free merch and live Discord hangouts. But you also can become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the fellowship of the podcast.
Of course, you can also help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please, please recommend us to your friends. For now, though, let's get back to the text. Matt, could you pick up where I left off?
Absolutely. Last of all he came. His men passed in. The mountain knights returned, and at their rear the banner of Dol Amroth and the prince. And in his arms before him on his horse he bore the body of his kinsman, Faramir son of Denethor, found upon the stricken field. "Faramir! Faramir!" men cried, weeping in the streets. But he did not answer, and they bore him away up the winding road to the citadel and his father. Even as the Nazgul had swerved aside from the onset of the White Rider, there came a flying deadly dart. And Faramir, as he held at bay a mounted champion of Harad, had fallen to the earth. Only the charge of Dol Amroth had saved him from the red Southland swords that would have hewed him as he lay. The Prince Imrahil brought Faramir to the White Tower, and he said, "Your son has returned, Lord, after great deeds." And he told all that he had seen. But Denethor rose and looked on the face of his son and was silent. Then he bade them make a bed in the chamber and lay Faramir upon it and depart. But he himself went up alone into the secret room under the summit of the tower. And many who looked up thither at that time saw a pale light that gleamed and flickered from the narrow windows for a while, and then flashed and went out. And when Denethor descended again, he went to Faramir and sat beside him without speaking. But the face of the Lord was gray, more deathlike than his son's. So now at last the city was besieged, enclosed in a ring of foes. The Ramas was broken, and all the Pelennor abandoned to the enemy. The last word to come from outside the walls was brought by men flying down the northward road, ere the gate was shut. They were the remnant of the guard that was kept at that point where the way from Anorion and Rohan ran into the townlands. Ingold led them, the same who had admitted Gandalf and Pippin less than 5 days before, while the sun still rose and there was hope in the morning.
Man, that is hard to believe that was just 5 days ago. I mean, so much has happened since then.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning of this section that you read. I really want people to reread the opening paragraph of this section and read it slowly. Put yourself in the shoes of the first-time reader who does not know that Faramir survives, that Faramir has a future. Read carefully and look at the tension Tolkien builds here. His men pass in. The mounted knights come in next. Finally, it's Imrahil on his horse carrying the body of his kinsman.
Yeah.
The body. That's pretty, I mean, that speaks poorly.
Yeah, like you can see this playing out in a cinematic way, and it kind of screams like, okay, this is
the guy's
reveal.
Dead.
Yeah. And it's only much later in tonight's episode that we get to the point where we learn that he's alive.
Yeah.
Tolkien does a masterful job in these paragraphs of conveying this uncertainty
I think so.
An overwhelming sense that he might be dead.
Absolutely. One quick thing, by the way, on this whole idea about bore the body of his kinsman. I know we've talked about this before, I think, but just to clarify, he is the kinsman of the Prince of Dol Amroth. We've mentioned this before. Imrahil's sister was Finduilas. That's Denethor's wife, who died in 2988. Boromir was 10. Faramir was 5 at the time. Imrahil then is Faramir's uncle. So he's carrying in the body of his nephew.
Yeah.
And
the people weep and call out his name because he's either dead or unconscious. He doesn't respond.
Right.
And they carry him up to the citadel.
And finally, we learn what it is that has caused this condition. He was hit by an arrow. That's a deadly dart. And this happened right as Gandalf's magic flashlight sent the Nazgul reeling.
Yeah, this happened as Faramir was fighting off a champion of Harad. And the only reason that Faramir doesn't get cut to pieces on the battlefield was the mounted sortie.
That's right. In other words, if Denethor had released the sortie seconds earlier, Faramir would likely not be lying here dead or near death. And I think that guilt is going to hit Denethor really hard, really soon.
Yeah. Imrahil brings Faramir up to Denethor at the White Tower and directly references Denethor's "that depends on the manner of your return" when he says, "Your son has returned, Lord, after great deeds."
Yeah, I think that was a very biting comment against his brother-in-law who he saw, mistreat Faramir. I mean, remember, Denethor's cruel comment to Faramir happened not just in front of Gandalf and Pippin, but at the council meeting with all of the captains. And we know that Imrahil was there because he spoke specifically about defending Caer Andros.
Yeah, and he then fills Denethor in on all the things that Faramir accomplished.
Right. What would that be, right? I mean, Imrahil wasn't there, so I wonder what he was able to, maybe got this information from some of the guys that he's coming back with in the retreat. Like, hey, so tell me what happened. He's getting a report from them, and he passes this on to Denethor. I don't know, what defense at the river?
Yeah. He might have, he might have seen him actually fighting against the champion of Harad.
That's true. That's true.
Shows up, yeah.
No, that's a good point. Well, whatever the case, Denethor doesn't say a word, right? I mean, he is stricken, perhaps by guilt. I mean, I think we can speculate reasonably that that's one of the things he's feeling. He looks at Faramir's face, then tells his servants, make a bed for Faramir, and then get out of here.
Yeah. And then, meanwhile, Denethor, he goes up into the secret room at the top of the tower.
Don't we all wish we had a secret room at the top of the tower to retreat to? Yeah.
I'm more of a dwarf, so I go for burrowing underground.
Down.
Yeah. I like the view. The view is nice.
Down to Goblin Town.
Now, we were told that people looked up and saw a pale light that gleamed and flickered before going out. And that when Denethor came back out of the tower, he sat silently by Faramir, and his face looked even more death-like than his son's.
That is bad news. And of course, we know, the reader doesn't really know this at this point, but I hope that you all are speculating, any of you first-time readers who are still with us, that must be the palantír, only because we've also told you that, hint, hint. So this incident really begs the question, what did Denethor see in the palantír that caused this reaction? I mean, he's clearly seen something, and Tom Shippey has some ideas. Now, in Author of the Century, which he wrote back in 2000, he asks the same question. What did Denethor see on the 13th, the day when Faramir was brought in, the day the pale light was seen flickering? The 13th is the day when Frodo is captured and taken to Minas Morgul. It was actually the Tower of Cirith Ungol, but okay, we'll let that slide. Shippey goes on to say, the likelihood is that is what Denethor has seen in a vision controlled by Sauron.
Shippey follows this up with his excellent essay, Another Road to Middle-earth, Jackson's Movie Trilogy, which can be found in his collection of essays entitled Roots and Branches. It's also very similar to what he says in Tolkien's book to Jackson's script, The Medium and the Message. A talk he gave at Swarthmore College that you've mentioned many times before. In the essay, Shippey writes, on the 13th, Faramir is brought back badly wounded, and Denethor retires to his secret chamber, from which people see a pale light that gleamed and flickered, and then flashed and went out. When he comes down, the face of the Lord was gray, more death-like than his son's.
Shippey continues, much later on, he tells Gandalf that he has seen the Black Fleet approaching, as it is, though he does not know, though at the moment the reader does, that the fleet now bears Aragorn and rescue, not a new army of enemies. However, Shippey continues, this does not seem quite enough to trigger Denethor's total despair. Surely we are meant to realize that what he has seen in the palantír is Frodo, whom he knows to be the ring-bearer, in the hands of Sauron. Both Frodo's capture and Faramir's wounding take place on March 13th, and one may recall that Sauron plays a similar trick by showing Gandalf and the leaders of the West Frodo's mithril coat and Sam's sword in the parley outside the Black Gate.
Shippy then argues that the matter is put beyond doubt, however, by what Denethor says to Pippin. "Comfort me not with wizards. The fool's hope has failed. The enemy has found it, and now his power waxes." The fool's hope is Gandalf's plan to destroy the ring. And the it that the enemy has found must be the ring. Once again, then, Denethor has seen something true in the palantír and has drawn from it a wrong conclusion.
I love that argument. And Shippy makes that very convincing. He talks a lot about how the palantíri do this, how people look into it, they see actual things that are accurate because the palantír can't lie, but then they draw from it a wrong conclusion. It's pretty convincing, frankly, and it makes a lot of sense. But what if it was something else? Maybe the fleet sailing up the river? After all, Aragorn does capture the Black Fleet today, the 13th. However, it doesn't begin to move up the Anduin until tomorrow, so he can't have seen that. And besides, he already knows about the existence of the fleet. It's why he lit the beacons all the way back on March 8th, like Baragond explained to Pippin in the first chapter.
And sadly, despite the abilities of the palantír, Denethor never knows that it's Aragorn in control of those ships anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, he'll tell Gandalf, "The wind of thy hope cheats thee, and wafts up the Anduin a fleet with black sails." Anyway, that last quote from Shippy relies on "the fool's hope has failed." Sure does sound convincing. Denethor is clearly convinced that Sauron has found the ring. And how could he be sure of that if he hadn't seen Frodo?
But there is some evidence against this conclusion, and I want us to talk through some of it. The biggest argument against Denethor having seen Frodo captured is simply that Tolkien tells us in the Tale of Years that Sauron doesn't find out about Frodo's capture until 4 days from now, when Shagrat brings Frodo's cloak and mithril coat along with Sam's sword to Barad-dûr. Quick aside, by the way, and a hat tip to Hammond and Skull, who add that Scheme tells us that Shagrat is then killed by Sauron, apparently for allowing the prisoner to escape, though quite possibly 2 dead battalions of orcs is enough to warrant the sudden termination. Boss, can we talk to HR about this? Ah! I want to know what the HR department's like at Barad-dûr, don't you?
I don't think they know about HR departments.
No, I don't think
Pip.
they do. I don't think they know about that, Pip.
Then there's the fact that when he looks in the palantír again, right before the end, and speaks to Gandalf, he doesn't say anything about Frodo or the ring.
Right.
It's all about the overwhelming forces approaching Minas Tirith, including the Black Fleet. If the ring had been captured, Denethor would certainly have been likely to mention it here. And if he had, Gandalf could have assured him it wasn't true. After all, he'd know through the possession of his own ring whether the One Ring was back in Sauron's possession.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, there's no doubt the second Sauron gets that ring back, Gandalf's going to know it.
Absolutely.
He's going to feel it through his ring and he'll know. So yeah, if Denethor thinks the ring has been captured and says that, oh, he has it now, Gandalf could be, no, he doesn't.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't. Even later than that, by the way, when looking back at all of this, Gandalf will say that Denethor saw nonetheless only those things which the power permitted him to see. The vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. So Gandalf is saying it was the vision of the great might of Mordor that did this.
So what did he see? Could he maybe have seen Frodo captured before Sauron knew of his capture? That doesn't really fit with Gandalf saying he saw nonetheless only those things, which Sauron let him see, though.
Right. I mean, that seems exclusionary that, because you're right. I mean, at first, the idea that maybe in looking at Minas Morgul and trying to determine maybe when the Witch King is going to attack or how much the forces, he's bringing out of Minas Morgul are, maybe he happens to scooch up a little bit up the valley and see the Tower of Cirith Ungol and sees Frodo there. Certainly that's not impossible. The power of the Palantír could do that. But if what Gandalf is saying here is correct, that Denethor saw nonetheless only those things that Sauron intended him to see, then he would not have been able to.
Yeah, and I honestly, I kind of look at this and wonder, the quotes that we read earlier about, the fool's hope has failed. I kind of think Denethor may be looking at it from a perspective, Gondor is going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So
it's the overwhelming might of Mordor.
Yeah. So regardless, like, this has failed because it hasn't saved, one of the greatest kingdoms remaining in Middle Earth, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, and from Denethor's perspective, really the only one that matters.
Yes, exactly. That was the roundabout way of getting to that point.
You're very nice to Denethor there. It really is a tough one. I mean, I like Shippy's argument a lot.
I do too, yeah.
And I find it very convincing, and because that is how the palantír work. I mean, you really do see factual things, but draw a wrong conclusion. Think about Sauron even, who has seen in the palantír Pippin thinking he's the ring bearer. Yeah. So he's seen an actual thing that's true, but he's drawn from it the wrong conclusion.
Yep.
And that's what happens when you speculate. And Shippy goes with that argument for a very long time, and it's really, really strong, but it does fall apart a little bit when you realize the timeline involved, that Sauron did not know and could not have known that Frodo had been captured, because there was no instantaneous way to communicate that with him. And he didn't know until Shagrat brings the news 4 days later. Poor Shagrat.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to this meeting, boss.
Talk about shoot the messenger.
Can we just use Zoom for this one? Well, folks, for a really, really in-depth look at this topic, I highly recommend The Curious Case of Denethor and the Palantír. It's an article by Jessica Yates, and it can be found in the spring 2009 issue of Malorn. Now, that's the annual publication of the Tolkien Society. It's a very thorough discussion of this question with far more information than we could include in a podcast episode, a sidebar, and a P5 combined. So be sure to check it out. If you're a member of the Tolkien Society, you have access to all the back issues of Malorn and Em on Hen, which is their bi-monthly bulletin. So go look it up online. And if you're not a member, well, it's another good reason to join the society.
Now, back to the text, and that's right, there's still more text for us to go over before our next reading here. We see now that the siege is complete. It's been delivered, as Bret said.
I love that phrase. They've delivered the siege, Knock, knock, UPS. What do you have for me, a siege? Need you to sign for this siege. So the final word of this enclosure comes from Ingold and his men. Now, he was the one, I still can't believe this is only 5 days ago. It was actually only 4 days ago, because he greeted them when they arrived early on the 9th.
Yeah.
Now, it's very late on the 13th. So 4.5 days. That's why it says 5. But that's just not that long ago. This must feel like just yesterday in some ways. And here he is bringing news that the encirclement of the foes is complete.
Yeah. And it's going back to your point. It's crazy how we said, in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, we see months and years go by like it's nothing. And then when we get to this, it's day by day, and it's crazy how much happens. Yeah.
I mean, 17 years go by between the long expected party and Frodo's departure from the Shire. Right. 17 years.
And here we're dealing with a couple days.
Like 17 minutes in this episode, Yeah.
And in the paragraph we skipped, we find that his message is certainly disheartening.
Yeah, it is.
And not only is Rohan not able to come now, even if they did, it wouldn't help us.
That's right. That other army, the one that came from the Morannon and overran Caer Andros, that army has arrived, and it's a big one. Battalions of Sauron's orcs. Now, you might remember Bret talking about company versus host last episode, and he used the term battle. Well, that's the same origin as the word here, battalion. And it's anywhere from a few hundred to 1,000 troops, so plural battalions is a problem.
Yeah, it's a big one. Add to that countless companies of Easterlings, shorter, stockier, almost like dwarves, carrying large axes.
Mm-hmm.
And this force holds the road at the north of the city, and they've gone into Anorion. That means Rohan is cut off and cannot come to Gondor's rescue in this siege.
That's right. They can't.
Now, that catches us up with the text, so it's time to go back. Alan, can you pick us up with our next reading?
I will. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip one more paragraph after the last one that we skipped. Busy as ants, hurrying orcs were digging lines of deep trenches in a huge ring, just at a bow shot from the walls. And as the trenches were made, each was filled with fire, though how it was kindled or fed by art or devilry none could see. All day the labor went forward, while the men of Minas Tirith looked on, unable to hinder it. And as each length of trench was completed, they could see great wains approaching. And soon yet more companies of the enemy were swiftly setting up, each behind the cover of a trench, great engines for the casting of missiles. There were none upon the city walls large enough to reach so far or to stay the work. At first, men laughed and did not greatly fear such devices, for the main wall of the city was of great height and marvelous thickness, built ere the power and craft of Númenor waned in exile, and its outward face was like to the tower of Orthanc, hard and dark and smooth, unconquerable by steel or fire, unbreakable except by some convulsion that would rend the very earth on which it stood. Nay, they said, not if the Nameless One himself should come. Not even he could enter here while we yet live. But some answered, while we yet live. How long? He has a weapon that has brought low many strong places since the world began. Hunger. The roads are cut. Rohan will not come. But the engines did not waste shot upon the indomitable wall. It was no brigand or orc chieftain that ordered the assault upon the lord of Mordor's greatest foe. A power and mind of malice guided it. As soon as the great catapults were set, with many yells and the creaking of rope and winch, they began to throw missiles marvelously high, so that they passed right above the battlement and fell thudding within the first circle of the city, and many of them, by some secret art, burst into flame as they came toppling down. Soon there was great peril of fire behind the wall, and all who could be spared were busy quelling the flames that sprang up in many places. All right.
Now, in the paragraph we skipped, we learned that with this news, the gate was shut. Honestly, I figured that it had been shut after the sortie, but maybe Denethor's the type to leave the front door open most of the time. I don't know.
He's got a screen door. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
And the men of the city can hear the army out in the Pelennor.
Yeah.
Burning everything, killing everyone they encounter.
Burninating the countryside, burninating the peasants. Sorry, it's a Trogdor reference here. Tell me you've seen Strongbad, the little old Flash comic that was on the web for years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I can see I have to educate you, sir. All right. All right. So yeah, so obviously they are burning out. I mean, this is disaster in the Pelennor, no doubt about it. And while the men in the city could not really guess, let alone properly estimate the number of enemies that had arrived during the night, oh man, the sorry light of morning reveals that whatever your worst case scenario was, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, the plain is covered with enemy troops.
Yeah.
Camps of black and red tents.
I love the description. I hated skipping this bit. It's like a foul fungus growth. Oh, ugh. Man. And these troops are getting busy out there. They are digging lines of trenches in a ring around Minas Tirith.
Yeah, and just to back up for a second, the foul fungus growth, I've been watching The Last of Us, so like that is really vivid in my mind, so it's double gross right now. But back to the trenches here. They're just out of reach of the archers on the walls. So
of course, right.
Good placement for, the bad guys here. Mm-hmm. And then the trenches are filled with fire.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
We talked about this with Bret, but this is really a smart move on the Witch King's part. They're getting ready to set up the siege engines, and you want to put each one of those behind a trench in order to prevent a successful sortie from coming out and destroying the siege engines before they're finished.
And remember, the Witch King here is preparing for a quick siege.
Yeah.
This is decidedly not a surround the city and starve them out siege, as the armies of Mordor are at the end of their logistical rope here. They have to take the city quickly.
That's right.
And that means a lot of siege engines to accomplish this job.
Mm-hmm. But what must this do to the morale of the men of Minas Tirith? They're watching all this happening, but they're unable to hinder it. There's not a thing they can do.
Yeah, the mental aspect is going to be a major topic of conversation in the coming portions.
The Witch King knows what he's doing here. I mean, he is a master at creating a situation that even without his despairing presence would cause a ton of despair. Yeah.
Yeah, and as the trenches were completed, wagons would roll up behind, setting up the siege engines, again, out of reach of any siege engines within the city.
That's right. Now, the men don't fear the siege engines themselves. Yeah, they don't like what they're seeing, this incredibly large force. They're not particularly afraid of the siege engines because the city they see, at least the wall, as nigh indestructible, and it is.
This is where we get that incredible description of the main wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great height and marvelous thickness, built by the Númenóreans at the peak of their powers. And the way it came off in the book, it makes me think they don't build them like they used to, Alex.
No, well, that's very much how Tolkien writes, isn't it? Right? I
Yeah.
mean, even Gimli later on, when they're in Minas Tirith later after all this, talks about how there's great stone here, but he could see that the newer buildings weren't as good as the older ones.
Yeah.
And that's just the medieval mindset, that we're in a time of decline instead of a time of progress. And that tone is all throughout the Legendarium. It's really just rich. But yeah, you're right. That's the way the book says it is, that the Eald ente work, right? The old work of giants. And we see that in Helm's Deep, and we see that here in Minas Tirith. Now, the outer wall here is very much like what we saw at Orthanc. Hard, dark, smooth, and utterly unbreakable. So this is nearly magical. Now, another film note, and I'm going to let this one slide because I happen to love the visual depiction of Minas Tirith in the films, but the outer wall should be black, not white. It should look like Orthanc, just that first outer wall. And I believe Ted Naismith has an illustration of Minas Tirith that is lore correct, that has a black first wall and then everything else is white. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I absolutely love, like you said, I love both depictions.
Yeah.
It's again one of those things where both are great, but the black outer wall is the correct.
It's the accurate one. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. Every time I see a picture of Mont Saint-Michel, the little monastery town off the coast of France, that's very clearly the visual inspiration for the Jackson version, I keep thinking, yeah, but it doesn't have a black wall.
Now, the men are very confident about this wall. They say that Sauron himself, though they don't name him, they just as they don't name Mordor.
Yeah.
Even if Sauron showed up, he could not come into the city while we're still alive.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, right? While we yet live, but how long exactly is that going to be, right?
Yeah. After all, we mentioned this with Bret a little bit. The threat of a siege is hunger.
Yeah.
Rohan cannot come and break this siege, so we will eventually starve to death.
Exactly. But of course, that's definitely not the way the Witch King is intending this siege to go. His army is far too large to support this far from home, this far from its logistical chains, and starving orcs will eventually abandon the cause or just die.
Yeah. And as if on cue, the siege engines begin to fire, but not at the wall. The Witch King isn't stupid. He knows how relatively pointless hitting the wall would be. Although, like Bret said, apply enough concussive force repeatedly, and eventually things can happen.
That is true. But a power and mind of malice guided this assault. I love that phrase. The Witch King isn't just ticking the box here on what's the next step in the siege. I can see him now consulting the list. Step 1, roll the troops up. Step 2, set up the siege engines. No, there is genuine hatred and strength here.
Yeah, at first we see the siege engines launching their shots above the great outer wall and landing within the first and what is the lowest circle of the city with flaming shots.
That's right. Now, this accomplishes at least one thing immediately. Men who might otherwise man the walls and shoot at any approaching attackers now have to be used putting out fires. Bret talked about this. It was a great point that he made. It not only lowers the morale, it busies the men, and it then runs the risk of separating them. As we'll find out in the next episode, a number of these people do get cut off because of the fires. But for now, you're going to pick up exactly where I left off. And if you thought flaming rocks were bad, well, the next ammunition's a little worse.
Then among the greater casts there fell another hail, less ruinous, but more horrible. All about the streets and lanes behind the gate it tumbled down, small round shot that did not burn. But when man ran to learn what it might be, they cried aloud or wept. For the enemy was flinging into the city all the heads of those who had fallen fighting at Osgiliath, or on the Rammas, or in the fields. They were grim to look on, for though some were crushed and shapeless, and some had been cruelly hewn, yet many had features that could be told, and it seemed that they had died in pain, and all were branded with the foul token of the lidless eye. But marred and dishonored as they were, It often chanced that thus a man would see again the face of someone that he had known, who had walked proudly once in arms, or tilled the fields, or ridden in upon a holiday from the green vales in the hills. In vain men shook their fists at the pitiless foes that swarmed before the gate. Curses they heeded not, nor understood the tongues of Western men, crying with harsh voices like beasts and carrion birds. But soon there were few left in Minas Tirith who had the heart to stand up and defy the hosts of Mordor. For yet another weapon, swifter than hunger, the Lord of the Dark Tower had: dread and despair. The Nazgul came again, and as their dark lord now grew and put forth his strength, so their voices, which uttered only his will and his malice, were filled with evil and horror. Ever they circled above the city, like vultures that expect their fill of doomed men's flesh. Out of sight and shot they flew, and yet were ever present, and their deadly voices rent the air. More unbearable they became, not less, at each new cry. At length even the stout-hearted would fling themselves to the ground as the hidden menace passed over them, letting their weapons fall from nerveless hands, while into their minds a blackness came. And they thought no more of war, but only of hiding and of crawling and of death.
Wow. Wow. That was intense. And
yeah.
Like we said leading into this, it gets worse. It gets way worse. Or as the text says a lot more poetically than I just did, less ruinous, but more horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see here now, instead of flaming rocks, we get the heads of the men of Gondor who were killed in their defending actions.
And the text doesn't spare us the details. Some of the faces are unrecognizable, crushed, misshapen, hewn. Tolkien conveys the horror of this moment in a way that doesn't dwell on the gore, but makes it abundantly clear just how awful this is.
Yeah, and side note, I love Tolkien is the master at not dwelling on gore, but also giving you enough that you know how terrible things are.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, he doesn't dwell on it, but he also doesn't cut it out completely.
Right.
Yeah.
And the heads that are recognizable clearly died in pain.
Yeah. Oh.
And we see all of them are branded with Sauron's mark. And there's this cruelty of marking his victims.
The time it takes to do that, right? I mean, that's one of the things this army has been doing all along after they've swept over the Pelennor or past the Ramas, is they aren't just, maybe that's one of the reasons why it took them so long to chase Faramir. They were too busy taking the heads off of the people that fell at the Causeway forts and then marking them with the eye. Yeah. Man, this is brutal psychological warfare. And then we get this reminder, and it's, man, the way Tolkien phrases it, it's heartbreaking because we get this reminder that the faces of these men would be seen and recognized by people who had clearly been their friends or even their loved ones, And there's just this brutal dichotomy between these lovely memories of a vacation in the hills and this horrible, horrible present.
Yeah. And my mind immediately went to like, what is there some supernatural thing at play here that it would just happen to be that people would see folks they recognize.
That the heads would fall in such a place that,
like
somehow.
This is a massive city. Like there's a lot of people in Minas Tirith.
Yeah.
It's very, very intense stuff.
Oh,
now,
it is.
A quick sidebar here. Let's be clear. Like Bret said, this is a very real thing.
Yeah.
Hammond and Skull points us to a book by Adrian Mayer called Greek Fire, Poison Arrows, and Scorpion Bombs, Biological and Chemical Warfare in the Ancient World, which sounds like a perfect book with which to calmly end the day.
Seriously, I'm putting that on my nightstand, man. Can't go to sleep at night? Just read a little Greek Fire, Poison Arrows, Scorpion Bombs. Yeah,
that sounds great. What better? I'm sure you'll have nothing but pleasant dreams.
Wow.
Now, In this book, Mayer describes something Bret mentioned. Mongols catapulting plague-ridden corpses of their own soldiers over the walls of a fortress in Kaffa, which is in the modern-day Ukraine, on the Black Sea in 1346. Wow. A very early form of biological warfare.
Using their own troops. But of course, I mean, that makes sense. They probably have a plentiful supply.
Right.
If the plague is striking them all down.
Plague, yeah.
But Mayer also points out a similar incident to this one here in the text, albeit on a much smaller scale, saying that terrifying the enemy was the sole object of a catapulting incident in 207 BC when the Romans hurled the head of the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal into the camp of his brother Hannibal. The act served to demoralize Hannibal, dashing his hopes of getting the reinforcements he needed to conquer Italy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, just imagine how much worse this would be if the forces of Mordor were flinging the heads of the Rohirrim into Minas Tirith.
Ooh, they might not recognize them, but they know what it means.
Right, yeah. If you saw those Rohirrim helmets, you would know. It would confirm their worst fears that Rohan was not coming to reinforce them.
That would be.
It'd be rough.
Yeah, that would be. Now, according to the Warfare History Network, the Crusaders did something similar in 1097 in Nicaea. They laid siege to the Turkish forces within the city, and after defeating a very large relief force, the Crusaders began to ratchet up the misery index yet another notch. To the horror of the besieged, a torrent of severed human heads began raining down upon the defenders of Nicaea. The Crusaders had lopped off the heads of the Turkish corpses that lay in heaps around Nicaea, and were now sending them flying over the walls of the city. On June 19th, thoroughly traumatized by their ordeal, the Turks surrendered. So great was their dread that they begged to be allowed to give the city back to the Byzantines rather than meet their fearsome new enemy, the Crusaders, face to face.
Wow. Now, the men in the city here back in Minas Tirith shake their fists in useless anger.
No, seriously. Thank you!
Yeah.
Get off my lawn!
The enemy doesn't understand their words, nor do they have pity to which one might appeal.
No.
But eventually, they don't even have the heart to defy Mordor by shaking their useless fists.
That's true. And that's because of the Nazgul's ultimate weapons, dread and despair. And as if on cue, the Nazgul arrive. The new and improved Nazgul, now with more evil and more horror.
That's right, because as Sauron's strength grows and is put forth, their power increases.
That's right.
And recall that they not only serve Sauron, they are essentially extensions of his will.
That's right. In Unfinished Tales, in the section on the hunt for the ring, we read about Sauron preparing for the Great War in which he planned to sweep all his enemies into the Western Sea. At length he resolved that no others would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the Ringwraiths, who had no will but his own, being each utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held.
So that's important for all you folks out there that think what would happen if the Ringwraiths reclaim the ring. They'd take it right back to Sauron because
that's exactly right.
No will but his.
And Tolkien makes that very clear in his letters that if in fact they were, had obtained the ring, even if the Witch King himself, who theoretically could have challenged Sauron, he would have absolutely taken it back to Sauron.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as to their dread, he adds that now few could withstand even one of these fell creatures, and as Sauron deemed, none could withstand them when gathered together under their terrible captain, the Lord of Morgul.
Yeah, and clearly Minas Tirith is not going to be able to withstand them either. So now the Nazgul are circling above the city, and I love the analogy to carrion birds, right? The vultures, expecting man flesh. And it's particularly interesting, I think, given that he referenced carrion birds by name just in the paragraph before, talking about the enemy in their kind of animalistic way.
And not to mention, not to get too spoilery here, but we're going to have some pretty epic quotes coming up from a fan favorite character, which brings in the phrase Lord of Carrion.
Lord of Carrion, indeed we will. Now, the Nazgul are out of range. They're even out of sight, but their voices become more and more unbearable with the passage of time. This isn't one of those things where,
it doesn't become white noise.
Right. Like, let's say there's a car alarm going off down the street. It's annoying as heck, but after a couple of minutes, it becomes part of the background noise. You're like, whatever.
You tune it out. Yeah.
This is not that, right? This is getting more and more unbearable. There's a cumulative effect of dread here.
Yeah, so much so that even the bravest of men threw themselves to the ground or stood totally stunned.
Yeah.
Their thoughts are so impacted by the despair caused by the Nazgul that they're not thinking about how to fight this siege or win the war, but only of getting away from this terrible despair and death.
Yeah, they are thinking of death. And I can understand why, given the circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the thing facing them, right?
Right, yes. Well, with that, it's time to dive back into the text. Alan, can you do the honors?
I will. During all this black day, Faramir lay upon his bed in the chamber of the White Tower, wandering in a desperate fever. Dying, someone said, and soon, dying all men were saying upon the walls and in the streets. And by him his father sat and said nothing, but watched, and gave no longer any heed to the defense. No hours so dark had Pippin known, not even in the clutches of the Uruk-hai. It was his duty to wait upon the Lord, and wait he did, forgotten, it seemed, standing by the door of the unlit chamber, mastering his own fears as best he could. And as he watched, it seemed to him that Denethor grew old before his eyes, as if something had snapped in his proud will, and his stern mind was overthrown. Grief, maybe, had wrought it, and remorse. He saw tears on that once tearless face, more unbearable than wrath. "Do not weep, Lord," he stammered. "Perhaps he will get well. Have you asked Gandalf?"
"Comfort me not with wizards," said Denethor. "The fool's hope has failed. The enemy has found it. Now his power waxes. He sees our very thoughts, and all we do is ruinous. I sent my son forth, unthanked, unblessed, out into needless peril, and here he lies with poison in his veins. Nay, whatever may now betide in war, my line too is ending. Even the house of the stewards has failed. Mean folk shall rule the last remnant of the kings of men, lurking in the hills until all are hounded out."
Men came to the door, crying for the lord of the city.
"Nay, I will not come down," he said. "I must stay beside my son. He might still speak before the end. That is near. Follow whom you will, even the grey fool, though his hope has failed. Here I stay."
So it was that Gandalf took command of the last defense of the city of Gondor. Wherever he came, men's hearts would lift again, and the winged shadows pass from memory. Tirelessly he strode from citadel to gate, from north to south about the wall, and with him went the Prince of Dol Amroth in his shining mail, for he and his knights still held themselves like lords in whom the race of Númenor ran true. Men that saw them whispered, saying, "Belike the old tales speak well. There is elvish blood in the veins of that folk, for the people of Nimrodel dwelt in that land once long ago." And then one would sing amid the gloom some staves of the Lay of Nimrodel, or other songs of the Vale of Anduin out of vanished years. And yet, when they had gone, the shadows closed on men again, and their hearts went cold, and the valor of Gondor withered into ash. And so, slowly, they passed out of a dim day of fears into the darkness of a desperate night. Fires now raged unchecked in the first circle of the city, and the garrison upon the outer wall was already, in many places, cut off from retreat. But the faithful who remained there at their posts were few. Most had fled beyond the second gate. Oh, man, it's getting real.
It just keeps getting worse.
It does. Oh.
So we finally transition back to the White Tower where Faramir is on his bed. And it's notable because it's the first time since his return that we're actually given evidence that he is in fact still alive.
Right.
Although we do see that he is suffering from a very high fever.
That's right. Now, the rumor goes out that he is dying, and soon the whole city thinks he's dying. But Denethor is sitting there silently. He's yes, he's with his son, and yes, that's important. But here's the thing. He's no longer doing his job as the steward of Gondor. He's no longer leading the defense of Minas Tirith.
Yeah, it's like a very, very much more depressing version of senioritis. Like he just doesn't care anymore.
Oh, man, I remember senioritis. Yeah, I didn't care. Fifth period, it depended. If lunch ran long, I didn't go.
So, senioritis probably has a whole new meaning for you now, right, Alan?
Oh, wow, Matt.
We can cut that.
No, it's brilliant. We're not going to cut that. That was so good.
Anyway, as often happens.
If I were you, I'd have saved that for the last episode you were doing, because I'm going to get you back next time. All
right. That said, we've got silliness aside here.
Yeah.
As often happens in moments like this, we get to see it from Pippin's perspective.
That's right.
That technique that Tolkien uses so well.
Mm-hmm.
These moments are so heavy, so dark, that they are compared to the days that Pippin was in the captivity of the Uruk-hai as they dragged him to Isengard.
Man, that makes these pretty rough hours. Then.
Yeah, this is not some, blissful time that Pippin is comparing this to.
No, and it's not even a mildly difficult time. He's comparing this to the days that he spent in captivity, being dragged and barely fed, nasty, moldy, who knows what, and being forced to drink that terrible orc draft. Oh, and knowing that he's being hauled off to probably be tortured for a thing he doesn't even possess.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no hope in sight, because you've got to assume, in that moment, like, oh, well, Aragorn and company, they're probably with Frodo,
Yeah. Now, interestingly, though, I do remember Pippin was the only one of the two of them that did have that particular hope. He's the one who let the leaf of Lorien go, wasn't it?
That's right. You're right.
Anyway, still, it's very, very dark times. And to compare this to that is to indicate just how severe this is. But yeah, it is his job to wait on Denethor, even if he is ignored or forgotten.
So he watches Denethor and sees him grow old before his eyes. In Pippin's understanding, it's as though he simply lost it. Denethor is broken.
Yeah, as he will then say, actually, in next week's episode when he says, my life is broken. Now, whether it's caused by grief or remorse, Pippin can only speculate, as can we. So let's. I say, why not both? I think it is really a mix of the two. He's obviously very sad that Faramir is in this state. I think he's also very sad that he's now seeing his line end in his mind. But I also think there's very much some remorse here. We get a hint of that when he talks about having sent his son out thankless and not blessed. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Denethor has like a longer cooldown period, because we saw him be kind of mean to Faramir like 2 days in a row. I would expect most dads would like cool down after a couple hours, but apparently it just takes Denethor a little bit longer. But yeah, he sent Faramir out on really bad terms. They did not leave. Yeah. So, like, if that was his last interaction with his son...
Oh, he would regret that.
And let's not forget the fact this is the second son he has sent that, in his mind, Faramir is dying and is going to die.
Yeah, to him, this is now an irreversible thing. He's
and
as good as dead, yeah.
And the same with Boromir. Like, he sent Boromir. He was the one who chose to send Boromir instead of Faramir, and Boromir died. So
stir not the dregs of bitterness in my cup, have I not?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's just gotten to the point where everything, the weight of everything that he's been carrying has just come to bear on him.
It's all just collapsed on top of him. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and Pippin watches as this proud man, this guy he's seen as a very proud man who we had never seen cry before, is shedding tears.
Yeah.
And Pippin, being the sweet person that he is, he attempts to offer some level of comfort and says, maybe he'll get better. And then he says, have you asked Gandalf?
That might be the wrong question to ask.
Yeah.
You probably shouldn't have mentioned Gandalf. I mean, Denethor's reaction is immediate and negative, but I have to give him this. At least he's saying something. These are the first words he's uttered since Faramir's return.
Yeah, and this brings us back to the discussion of what did Denethor see in that palantír?
Right.
He says, the fool's hope has failed. The enemy has found it, certainly suggesting that he believes Sauron has found the ring.
But did he see that? He couldn't have seen that, right? He could not have seen Sauron finding the ring, because even if he saw Frodo in captivity, A, he wasn't in Sauron's captivity yet.
Yes.
And B, he didn't have the ring because Sam had the ring. It didn't happen. And palantír, as we've talked about before, they can be manipulated, especially by somebody as powerful as Sauron.
Yeah.
They cannot be made to show something that isn't real.
Right.
So this part of it, the enemy has found it, is an assumption. And he's drawing that based on some sort of evidence. But what?
Yeah, there's part of me that just wonders if it's, this force that has come to bear on his city is part of that. Like, just seeing Sauron wield this unfathomable force.
Yes.
If that has something to do with it. Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. In his mind, just like Faramir's death, right? Faramir is dying. To him, Faramir's death is an inescapable reality. It has not happened yet, but it is unavoidable. And I think it's the same thing with this.
Yeah.
The enemy has found it. No, he hasn't found it, but he inevitably will find it because his force is so overwhelming and so large. There's no way that anything could ever escape his notice.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of what's going on here.
Yeah. And I think, Denethor, for all the great characters we have that cling to hope, Denethor shows us what happens when a character loses hope.
Yes, boy, he sure does.
Yeah.
He sure does. The Denethor Theoden comparison is so rich. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, back to Denethor here, he goes on to reveal some of his regret.
Right.
He acknowledges that he sent Faramir out into a danger that he didn't need to face, and without thanking him or blessing him.
Yeah, and then he goes on to talk, like we mentioned in the previous discussion there, he's also sad about the ending of his line and the ending of the House of the Stewards. And that's true if Faramir dies. But I have to admit, it seems like it's the wrong time to be thinking of the future of your line instead of the future of your son who's right here in front of you. There's a little bit of, I don't know, just
a little bit of pride in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like some misplaced
disconnect,
pride.
Just sort of like that doesn't fit right. But that's, again, it's Denethor. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that goes back to, the way the line of the kings ended. And, there's some baggage from that. And now to see his line and, because he's kind of come to think of his line as,
that'd be hard not to.
Pretty important,
The stewards have been ruling the city for over 1,000 years at this point. So, yeah, he's not the king in name, but he is the king in terms of power.
Yeah. And then he laments the future of the rule of Gondor.
Yeah.
Mean folk, meaning ordinary folk, will rule over the city.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing, though. He knows who Aragorn is, right? When we get this conversation when he confronts Gandalf later, he knows who Aragorn is. He knows that Aragorn is on his way. He knows what Aragorn's claim is. So it seems to me that he is lumping Aragorn in among the mean folk. And that actually fits because remember when he does talk to Gandalf in the Pyre of Denethor chapter, he refers to Aragorn as the last of a ragged house, long bereft of lordship and dignity. He is mean, according to Denethor.
And just as a side note, that's one of my favorite lines.
Isn't it?
It's so poetic. It
is. No,
it's
flows
great
off the
in the
tongue
movies. It's great in it also adds the indignity part in the books, which is just like an extra little twist of the knife.
Jab.
Yeah.
Denethor's really good at those kinds of things.
He is.
He's brutal. His words, he's a master of the put down, no doubt about it.
Now, when the men come to the door asking for Denethor, he refuses to come down.
Yep.
And keep in mind here, it's his job to defend the people of Minas Tirith.
Quite literally. Yeah.
It's really his sole responsibility to look out for the best interest of Gondor. But as we said earlier, he's totally succumbed to despair and he gives up this responsibility.
Yep. Now, out of guilt, maybe he chooses his son. I mean, I think that's part of it. He feels so badly about what happened and how he treated him that now he puts him above the city, above Gondor, which he ought not to do. In the hopes that he might be able to speak before he dies, he sticks around, even though he knows that death is imminent in his mind. And then, of course, he tells everybody else, follow anybody, even follow Gandalf. I don't care anymore.
Yeah. Even that guy that I don't really care for, go follow him, whatever. And I keep, now that I've got the brain firing on the cylinders here of Boromir and Faramir and like tying these two together. I can't help but wonder if, this is a little bit of what he wouldn't give to have one last, small word from Boromir. And now like he's clinging to this hope that he might get one last moment with his other son, with his one remaining son.
If he does, it's probably not going to be, "You were a great dad. Don't worry."
It's
not going to be that.
But man,
this
is rough stuff. Yeah,
it really is. This is really hard. Yeah.
Now, with the abdication of Denethor from his role as steward, Gandalf takes command, and he does this so he boosts morale wherever he goes, as one would expect.
That's right. Now, when that happens, I honestly can't help but think of the moment when Círdan gives Narya, that's the ring that Gandalf bears, to him at his arrival in the Grey Havens. And for that, I want to take us to Unfinished Tales, the section on the Istari, where we read, "But Círdan, from their first meeting at the Grey Havens, divined in him the greatest spirit and the wisest, and he welcomed him with reverence, and he gave to his keeping the third ring, Narya the Red. For, said he, great labors and perils lie before you, and lest your task prove too great and wearisome, take this ring for your aid and comfort. It was entrusted to me only to keep secret, and here upon the west shores it is idle, but I deem that in days ere long to come it should be in nobler hands than mine, that may wield it for the kindling of all hearts to courage."
Or there's a very similar passage in Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age in the Silmarillion.
That's right.
"Take now this ring," Círdan said, "for thy labors and thy cares will be heavy, but in all it will support thee and defend thee from weariness. For this is the ring of fire, and herewith, maybe, thou shalt rekindle hearts to the valor of old in a world that grows chill." Whichever passage you read, it's clear that kindling hearts to valor and courage is Gandalf's role, and it's the thing that this ring helps him accomplish.
That's true. The Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire.
Different ring. Ring.
It's every once in a while we have to reference it as that. So not only does the ring help Gandalf lift the morale of the men, so too does the presence of Imrahil, the Prince of Dol Amroth.
That's right. They carry themselves as the lords that they are.
Yeah.
Like they did when they arrived a few days earlier, when it was clear that they were the elite of the reinforcements.
That is true. They are men in whom Númenorian blood ran true, just as we are told it does in Faramir, perhaps explaining why his presence is so important to people like Baragond.
Yeah, and why it would be a gut punch right now to hear that he is dying.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we get the clearest statement yet about the possible elven history of the line of the Prince of Dol Amroth.
We sure do. And man, I want to cover that here, but there's so much in this chapter, there's just no time. So we're going to cover that at length near the end of the season, at the time when Legolas notices a little something in Imrahil.
And their presence even inspires men to break into song at a time like this, which is amazing considering what we've read.
That is amazing, right? This does not feel like a time to break into song.
Yeah.
Witch King is like, there'll be no singing here. Yeah. This is really a morale boost, and it's a huge morale boost. But the thing is, when they're gone, the despair caused by the Nazgul returns in full force. It just hammers down on them.
Yeah, it's like when someone turns on a flashlight in a dark room. Now you can see, now you feel more hope. But when the light goes off, the darkness seems even darker than it was before.
Yeah. And that's when we get that powerful line that we talked about at the beginning of the episode and that we talked about again with Bret. The valor of Gondor withered into ash. Oh, my goodness. That is just rough.
Yeah. And as day becomes night, we read that the men of the city are moving from fear to desperation.
Yeah.
The Witch King's plans have worked. The first circle of the city is now essentially abandoned.
That's right. I mean, there are fires burning now without anybody trying to put them out. Most soldiers have retreated past the second gate.
Yeah, and the soldiers on the outer wall, providing what limited protection they might have against the siege towers and battering rams, are now cut off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bad situation for them to be in, and there's no way for reinforcements to get to them, so when they're gone, and there will be no more defense. The faithful who remained there at their posts were few, but I am absolutely certain that Barlaman remained at his post. What does Barlaman have in the mailbag for us tonight, Matt? My faith in Barlaman might be misplaced, by the way.
Okay, Martin M. writes in, pointing out that in episode 252, when you and Sean were covering the stairs of Cirith Ungol last season, you were talking about the Phial of Galadriel and how it counters the ring. He goes on to say that this has made him wonder, what would the effect of the light of the phial be on a ring wraith?
Oh my goodness, that is an interesting question, Martin. Obviously, we're never given a chance to see the direct impact of the Phial of Galadriel on the Nazgul, but we do have some data points that we can look at in order to sort of give us the grounds on which to speculate. So we'll start with some things. We're going to start with Unfinished Tales, and there are a couple of lines there to consider. One, when talking about the actual disadvantages of the ring wraiths, and this is in The Hunt for the Ring, the text says, all except the Witch King were apt to stray when alone by daylight. And then in a footnote, we also read that of Khamûl, it is said here, and here is Tolkien's notes about the movements of the Black Riders, that he was the most ready of all the Nazgul, after the Black Captain himself, to perceive the presence of the ring, but also the one whose power was most confused and diminished by daylight. The most confused and diminished, I'll note. You combine that with the earlier comment, and it's clear that all of them, aside from the Witch King himself, had some problems operating in daylight, and that's just daylight.
Yeah.
Now, we also know that Aragorn explained to Merry and the others on Weathertop as the Nazgul approached, they themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. And in the dark, they perceive many signs and forms. Then they are most to be feared. So light bad, dark good, basically.
Basically, yes. And the phial carries the light of the Star of Eärendil, which is, in fact, the light of a Silmaril,
Right.
which in turn is the light of the two trees of Valinor. But it is a next best thing. The Silmarils were bright, but not as bright as the trees, and the phial itself contains only the reflected light of Eärendil, so it's not quite the same as walking around with Telperion in your pocket.
There's an image.
Yeah. Still, this light is special, no doubt,
Yeah.
and it had certain powers. I mean, we saw what it did in Shelob's lair. As its power waxed and hope grew in Frodo's mind, it began to burn and kindled to a silver flame, a minute heart of dazzling light, as though Eärendil had himself come down from the high sunset paths with the last Silmaril on his brow. The darkness receded from it, until it seemed to shine in the center of a globe of airy crystal, and the hand that held it sparkled with white fire.
And that's true, and that was a pretty amazing moment, but I think we need to recall the light alone wasn't enough against Shelob. We read, but other potencies there are in Middle-earth, powers of night, and they are old and strong. And she that walked in the darkness had heard the elves cry that cry. That is referring back to Aya Eärendil Elenion and Kalima. Far back in the deeps of time, and she had not heeded it, and it did not daunt her now. The radiance of the star-glass was broken and thrown back from their 1,000 facets, but behind the glitter, a pale, deadly fire began steadily to glow within, a flame kindled in some deep pit of evil thought. So it was only after Frodo drew Sting and started marching towards Shelob that she hesitated. No brightness so deadly had ever afflicted her eyes before. From sun and moon and star they had been safe underground, but now a star had descended into the very earth. And so it was, it seems, that it was a combination of the vial, Sting, and Frodo's bravery that combined to drive Shelob away, not to mention living in a cave for hundreds of years and having dozens of eyes.
Yeah, I think, she's been in the darkness a little while. They might be unused to a light that strong.
Even a tiny little, like an LED light on your watch would be enough.
Be like, hey, whoa, now.
Turn that out, man.
Now, the phial also had an effect on the Watchers near the Tower of Cirith Ungol, forcing them to allow Sam through, so it's clearly powerful.
That is true. And this is why we put this question in tonight. In the last few episodes, we've seen Gandalf use light, albeit not from the vial. as a very effective defensive weapon against the Nazgul. And that's, I think, maybe where we can start to then take all these pieces of evidence together and maybe start to speculate. He's twice used this magic handheld flashlight to drive them away. So light alone, light as wielded by a Maiar, sent back to Arda by a Iluvatar, but light has a powerful impact on the Nazgul. Now, would the vial be as effective as the light from Gandalf's hand? Less so, more so, would it impact the Witch King, who's kind of a tier above the rest of the Nazgul? I don't know. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Man.
Let's just throw this around and speculate.
Yeah, that's pretty much all we can do with this, right? It's just wild speculation here.
Yeah.
The point that you just made about, Gandalf's light being light wielded by a Maiar makes me wonder if the file also, it would depend on the wielder, perhaps.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Maybe with Frodo, it's Frodo, he's just a hobbit. He's got obviously this powerful light, but he is still just a hobbit. If this is in Galadriel's hand, if this is in Gandalf's hand, maybe there's an amplification factor here.
That's a very good point. I mean, if you notice, the light in the vial reacts to Frodo's bravery. As he sort of gets braver, it gets brighter.
Yeah.
And I have a suspicion that somebody like Gandalf would be able to wield it with more power than anybody else, especially when combined with the fact that he's a ring bearer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if Gandalf were to have the vial here, in combination with the light that he wields, that is part of his natural power now as Gandalf 2.0, as an Istari, but upgraded version of the Istari. Yeah, I have a feeling it would have done wonders, at least against the other Nazgul. I have to say, I think I would probably land on the Witch King going, yeah, let me just get my sunglasses out. Put on a pair of Ray-Bans and I don't care anymore. I think he's kind of he's tough, man.
Yeah.
I think the Witch King's a different story altogether. The more we read about him, the more how he's not just like 10% better than the other Nazgul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's barely below Sauron. He's got so much power.
Right. And I think it's not directly related to the light aspect, but the Nazgul in general, and especially the Witch King, it's so interesting, the things that do affect them.
Water.
It's not necessarily the most, the things that would come to mind first. Like, I love when Aragorn tells the hobbits that invoking Varda's name was more dangerous to them than, stabbing them.
And Tolkien actually mentions that as well in his notes. I think these are in Scheme, where he talks about how with that, Frodo actually might have been able to hurt the Witch King had that knife actually hit him instead of just the cloak. But it was the mentioning of Varda's name that really drew the ire and caused the Witch King to fear him.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very good point. You're right. It is interesting what they fear and what they don't.
It is.
Like, there are these almighty, powerful creatures who, oh no, she mentioned Varda's name. Oh, she said it. Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have mentioned Varda's name while, they were in the middle of a moat or something, man, you'd be really in business there.
Yeah, especially if you had, like the light of the vial of Galadriel there too. Yeah. Now I'm seeing like Wicked Witch of the West scenes with the Witch King. Good stuff. Well, folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Be sure to join us again next week when Gandalf most certainly does not get his staff broken, dang it.
That's right. And Shadowfax definitely doesn't panic and throw Gandalf off either.
Absolutely.
Now, folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP. Editor Jordan Rennells, Barlaman Becca Davis, Social Media Manager Casey Hilsey, Event and Patreon Community Coordinator Katie McKenna, Graphic Artist Megan Collins, and Website Guru Phil Dean.
Now, speaking of the website, please be sure to give us a visit there. Come see us at theprancingponypodcast.com. We have show notes there. We have hilarious outtakes. We have Prancing Pony ponderings. And, of course, we have our online storefront where you can get all sorts of PPP merch, including some new designs from Megan.
Very cool. You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony podcast is, first and foremost, a podcast about the books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. The PPP gets a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
We also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. I'm going to start with DeMay in Alaska. Then there's James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, B in California, Joseph in Texas, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, and Erwin from the Netherlands.
There's also Dylan in Australia, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaksu in Illinois, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, June in Ireland, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Connor in North Carolina, Keith in Alabama, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, and James in Massachusetts. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you very, very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe now through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, well, your songs of the Vale of Anduin out of vanished years to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of you asking your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Barliman. Even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able.
As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
This is the end. We are going. We are leaving now. Goodbye.